So in our track, we now have the main melodic components established for everything. Now we can move on to creating some lead synthesizer patches that will accent the chord progressions that we created in the previous videos. There's all sorts of different lead sounds that are commonly used in synthwave music. They are longer leads that are held down that have some sort of modulation, and there are also lots of different styles of plucks that are used to kind of accent the various different sections. In this video, we're going to be making some different plucked leads, and then in the next video, we'll be making a longer modulated vibrato lead. So to create this, we'll use the stuff from the UVI workstation again. So I went ahead and just loaded that up to save a little bit of time. And what we want for this first lead is something softer, as it's going to be sort of a mid-range lead pluck sound. This lead will carry the main melodic component of our whole lead part. So let's load in another instance of the JP Legacy. We'll do the Saturn 8, which you can remember is the Jupiter 8 emulation, very similar to the Juno 60. So this would be commonly used in a lot of 80s tracks. Then we can go over to the pluck, and then we want to load in this pluck O lead patch, which on its own just sounds like this. So this really great plucked lead, let's pop over to the effects and just turn off that reverb for now. Because we can always add that back in a bit later. It'll just help make things a bit punchier and more present in our mix. So there's also a lot of bass in this sound, so let's go ahead and cut that out with the equalizer real quick. We'll just drag in the EQ8. We can high pass everything, and then want to go up to 441, because this is just a lead sound that will sit on top of everything. Then this pluck sounds similar to what our main chord patch was doing, and it also has kind of a nice and phasey quality to it. So let's play up that 80s sound by adding in a chorus unit. We'll use the same chorus plugin, but you can always use any of your favorite chorus units. We'll use the Tal chorus, which emulates the chorus from a Juno 60 synthesizer. So again, kind of keeping with that vintage flavor. So let's swap it over to the Type 2 chorus. Bring that dry wet up rather substantially, and that sounds like this. So it really fattens everything up for this lead. So this has two benefits. First, it makes our track sound a little bit wider, and it also adds some movement to our pluck as well. And the synthesizer patches inside of synthwave tracks are what gives the genre its unique sound. So play up the 80s flavor of everything as much as you can during the sound selection and design process for best results. So now we can get to programming our lead patch. Let's go ahead and create a 4-bar loop. We could do that at any of these 4 bars. We'll just do it on the first 4. So we'll just select that, Command-Shift-M, to give us a new MIDI clip. Now let's change the snap over to 1/32, and let's zoom in to just these first 2 bars here. So that way we're only looking at the first half of our sequence. Now let's go down to A2, so that's A in the second octave, which just sounds like this. It's kind of a nice mid-rangey sound. So let's start off on the A in the second octave, because that's our root note. And let's go ahead and create an ascending arpeggio pattern, kind of like what we did with that mid-range arp layer that's on top of the bass. Let's just descend up the scale and have these in intervals of 16th notes. So we'll go to the next step in the scale, and we'll swap over, go to the next one. And so far that sounds like this. So even though we're creating a lead sound and not necessarily an arpeggio pattern, we want to create something that sounds like it's going somewhere. So going back to that idea of making a track that feels like it's driving, both literally and figuratively. So to do this, we have that ascending pattern. Now let's go ahead and make it feel a little bit more epic and a bit more resolved by jumping up to an A in the third octave. Then we want to move our lead pattern along from that higher note and make sure it still feels like it's going somewhere. So let's go ahead and go over to kind of the second half of this bar, and let's have it play that same note again. Then we can have it jump down 1 step in that scale. But then let's go ahead and have it go to the D note. And we'll probably do that about right here. And that sounds like this. And the reason this D note sounds interesting is because it's that fourth, which if you remember back to what we did with the chords, it's that suspended note, but then that chord. So this adds some nice dissonance to our lead pattern. It makes it sound like it has some unresolved tension. So far it sounds like this. And then we want to go ahead and resolve some of that tension. by adding in an A. So we'll go down to this A note here, the start of this third bar, and we can add in that note. Let me just zoom out so you can see everything. So now that last pattern sounds like this. So now it feels nice and resolved because we went back to that A note. Then at the very end, let's go ahead and create some sort of melodic fill for this last section, just to kind of help keep things fresh for the listener. So let's start off on a note like G. So we'll have that probably start about halfway through this bar here. Then we can create an ascending pattern. So we'll jump up one of the steps of that scale. And we'll have it kind of do the same sort of fast arpeggio pattern like what we had here, where they're just playing 16th notes. And let's jump up to something a bit unexpected like an E note. So we'll go up higher, kind of like what we did here with this note. So let's grab a E in the third octave. And that sounds like this. So we're raising up that tension. It feels like it's going somewhere. And then we kind of want to resolve it, but not fully. So let's go ahead and jump down 2 semitones. So do sort of a triad type thing here. And we'll go over to this C note. And that sounds like this. So this kind of rounds out that pattern, but still feels like it's going to go somewhere, which will bring us back to the beginning, which is the root note. Listen how musically this pattern changes if I was to swap this over to an A note. You'll see that suddenly the energy of this lead pattern sort of dies out whenever I switch that last note. So let me just play that whole sequence for you. So it doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere, but if I was to swap that over to that C note, and then play that for you. It's much more interesting for the listener, and it really brings you back to the beginning of that whole lead melody. Then we can copy this over so it plays twice in our 8-bar section. And then we could also drop that volume so it's not too loud. Now let's add in a quick counter melody to do some musical call and response between the two different sections. So we'll go ahead and name this something like Pluck Lead 2. Then we can solo that out and open up that track. Could also bypass the EQ and the chorus for now. And then for this sound, we want to have the characteristics of it be slightly different than the main pluck, so that way the listener can clearly hear the difference between the two different lead stab sounds. This will make the musical call and response more effective. And we'll be using this patch for the second half of this 8 bars. So what I want to have here is going to be a heavily detuned, wiry lead sound that has kind of a wobble to it. Just about every really 80s sounding lead synthesizer patch is fair game for synthwave, so this type of sound will make a really nice addition. It's normally something that wouldn't really work on its own, but in context of a synthwave track, it sounds really awesome. So let's go ahead and open it up, swap it over to the Mercury 80, which I find is really great for leads and pads. And then we want to go to bells, and then we want to go to Darling Sign. Then we want to turn off the second oscillator, because on its own it just sounds like this. It's kind of this weird sine wave thing, so we don't want that. We just want this wiry lead. Now let's push that sustain all the way up on the amplitude. Make sure that the first oscillator is selected so that that is being applied to the first oscillator. And we want to turn the resonance all the way up. And then the depth control all the way down. So that way we get less of a pluck and it's more of kind of this stab. And then before I forget, let's also turn off that delay. And then we want to create some modulation. So let's go ahead and go over to the edit. We'll hop over to this section here. We'll go to unison mode, create some stereo width. So we'll make sure the spread's all the way up, put the detune all the way down, or just up slightly maybe, to maybe about 1.19. Take the color down to an amount about 1, and that sounds like this. And that'll kind of just widen up that whole patch. Then we want to go ahead and add in that modulation. So go to the modulation part of this VST. Go ahead, drop that speed down because we want a really slow modulation. Make sure the sync is set to off. Then want to make sure that this is set to oscillator number 1 and the volume control. Hear that kind of wobble? So it'll make our lead a little more interesting. Let's also turn off the reverb as well. Then we could hop back over to this equalizer and leave it at the same filter cutoff that we had previously. We could turn on the chorus and we'll have a similar setting. We could actually just bring that dry wet down just slightly because we want to play up that kind of phasey 80s quality of the whole synthesizer patch. So we'll leave the chorus on there as well. And then we'll create a 4-bar pattern on the second half of these 8 bars here. And then let's go ahead and create our lead sound. So let's go ahead and start off on a A note, but I don't want this to start off at the very beginning of the whole sequence. So we'll have it start halfway through the first bar. We'll have it start maybe on A2. Let's see what that sounds like. There we go. We could use that as our kind of root note. So go ahead and swap that over again to the 30-second notes, just to kind of adjust the length of that note, just so it's a little bit shorter of a pluck. And then we'll go ahead and have that hop up to D, which is that fourth again, that adds that tension and sort of melodic dissonance. So have that happen halfway through this part here. And then we'll have that hop up to an E. So we can have that E here, move the D over. That sounds like this. We could probably drop these down an octave as well. So that way the sound is a little bit more mid-rangey. This is basically kind of interplaying between this sort of main lead here that's ascending, and then we have this lead happening. So altogether, those two leads sound like this. Go ahead and just select them, and they all sound like this. So they're kind of playing off of one another. The second lead is providing a counter melody. Let's go ahead and finish that out really quick. So we'll hop on over to kind of the end of the second bar. We'll play this top note again. And then we'll create a really simple descending pattern. So we'll have it go from this E note, which again is that third. Then we'll have it end on a G note. And this just helps bring everything to a close. And the reason this feels melodically cohesive is because the notes in that chord, if we look at the chords here, you can see that we're jumping back down to that G. So that's why that kind of melodically feels cohesive. So altogether, that lead sounds like this. So on its own, it doesn't really sound like much, but once we layer that in with the other lead, it'll sound quite nice, and it'll play off the sort of melodic characteristics of it. Let's turn that down in volume quite a bit because it's pretty loud right now. And then we could spot back over to our main section, and I could show you all those leads in context of the loop. And all those completed lead sounds sound like this. So that's how to make the two main pluck leads of our song. In the next video, we'll be adding in this nice vibrato lead, which will add the sort of electric guitar component to the song and help it feel nice and epic.